You're listening to the Downeast Mike podcast, the quirky little podcast from Maine. And now, your host, Downeast Mike.
Good morning, everybody. This is Downeast Mike of the world famous Downeast Mike podcast. Welcome to our podcast episode, Downeast Mike episode 113, news and commentary for Sunday, January 7th, 2024. Who else is on a diet at this time of year? I'm seriously thinking about starting a diet, or at least changing what the current diet is to something a little bit different. You know, maybe it's time to lose a pound here or there. But actually, there would be best to lose a lot of pounds. But that's the time of year where your metabolism slows down. You got to do something about it, right? I hope everybody's doing well on this Sunday. We're expecting a big snowstorm here in Maine. Big by this year's standards, 3 to 5 inches. It would be just a standard snowstorm for any other year. But this year we have no snow on the ground. Kind of like it. Makes it easier to get outside and amble around a little bit and not be indoors all the time. In today's podcast, we have, our disclaimer, sorry. Some of this is whimsy, some of it's true, and the interpretation of it all is entirely up to you. In today's episode, we have a cold snap breaking records from 1981. We have the first test tube twins from 1981. Gold and eagles trying to nab a boy, that was from 1886. And we're going to take a look at Maine's outdoor shy tree. It's shy of being outside. That's coming up in the podcast. No birthdays today. We have a word, though. Transmogrify. Transmogrify. To change in appearance or form in a disturbing way. We cannot abide, is a sample sentence. We cannot abide that particular interior decorator because he always manages to transmogrify tasteful displays of luxury into pompous tableaus of arrogant wealth. That's a pretty meaty sentence. Did you know that the prefix trans, meaning across or beyond, appears in many words that evoke change, such as transform and transpire, but mogrify is a bit of a mystery. Regardless of the word's origins, writers have found transmogrify useful for centuries. It was used in the play The Amorous Prince, featuring an early example of the word, and about a century later, Scottish poet Robert Burns used it in his address to the unco-guid, or the rigidly righteous. And in the late 20th century, cartoonist Bill Watterson's comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes, featured an invention called a transmogrifier. The first iteration was a cardboard box, and later a water pistol was a transmogrifier gun that had various transmogrification functions. This could be a transmogrification day. Let's look at this day. In 1981, there was a cold snap. It was considered an old-fashioned winter. Many people in Maine get nostalgic when they talk about the winters of days gone by when horses and wood stoves kept things moving. This is 1981. The winter of 79-80 was one of the state's mildest ever, but the winter of 80-81 so far is one of those old-fashioned winters. Temperature records across Maine were broken in the latest cold snap to grip the state. Harsh, destructive cold has twice wreaked havoc this winter. Maine had the coldest Christmas ever in December. Where was I in 1981? After New Year's weekend, the bitter cold again struck. I was probably in a passenger seat of a Honda Civic, shivering. 7 people have died in Maine as an indirect result of the winter's harshness. 4 died in a house fire caused by an overheated wood stove. 3 were killed in highway accidents, all caused by frozen snow. Thousands of cars were paralyzed by the cold. They really paint a grim picture here. Hundreds of homes, many with wood and coal stoves, suffered damage from ice-ruptured heating and drinking water pipes. The AAA Auto Club said calls over the weekend came in at the rate of 1 per minute. Not that anybody was counting. Sunday, more than 500 calls for help were received. I guess they were counting. The Central Maine Power Company experienced severe problems with electrical failures. The lines just shrink in this cold and they snap. Then we have a tough time getting power restored because the load is extremely heavy, with furnaces and heaters going like they have to be in this kind of cold. Anyway, it was 18 degrees below zero on Saturday. And the National Weather Service, that was the coldest January 4th reading at Portland, Maine, since record keeping began in 1872. What else? They went on a bit about that. It was across actually New England. It wasn't just Maine. Residents of embarrassed Minnesota were more than red when the temperature sank to 45 below Saturday night, and temperatures across Minnesota were not much higher on Sunday. I've talked to people from Minnesota. They seem kind of impervious to the weather. Doesn't seem to bother them much. This day in 1981, 2 Australian women were expecting the first test tube twins conceived outside the womb through a new fertility technique. Dr. Carl Wood of Melbourne's Monash University said his team of fertility experts used the new lab techniques to conceive 9 embryos, including 2 sets of twins, and implant them in the wombs of women. Wood, whose work led to the birth of Australia's first test tube baby last year, said all the fetuses appeared to be developing normally, and the British publication reported as reported in the British publication in 1980. They were the first in the world ever conceived outside the womb. He said carrying out the outside the womb fertilizations, his team relied on 2 new developments: the use of fertility drugs to induce ovulation and improved methods to transfer the egg back into the mother's womb. I would think by today the whole test tube baby thing would be perfected. We had a story from Machias, Maine. A woman is recovering after lost in a storm. 68-year-old woman from the Jacksonville district of East Machias became disoriented walking up her driveway on Friday night, and she nearly froze to death before she was rescued in a snow-covered field near her home, and then she made it home Sunday recovering from frostbite. A worried telephone call from a couple who drove her home after work on midnight on Friday. They called her nephew, and they combined with the nephew's thorough search of the field near her home through the fierce storm that probably saved her life. Mrs. Anscombe, 68, completed her shift at Marshall's Health Care Facility at about 11 o'clock on Friday. The temperature was 14 below zero, and snow blown by frigid winds further impaired visibility to the few drivers venturing on Maine's roads as midnight approached. So Edward Graham was one of the few drivers to come out in his van to pick up his wife, who'd been working with Mrs. Hanscom. And the 6-mile drive to Mrs. Hanscom's home, the first stop took 25 minutes. And at the intersection of Route 191 and the town road, they saw the access road filled with snow and impassable for the Graham vehicle. And this is where it gets interesting here. See if you can follow this. Mrs. Hanscom, the widow of the late Deputy Sheriff Alfred Hanscom, refused higher boots and other clothing that her friends felt would help protect her legs from the snow and cold while she walked to the hilltop. And believing she'd have no problem reaching the darkened house and understanding that her friends would wait until she was safely inside, she left the van. So she takes off. She says, I'm fine. According to the Grahams, she walked some distance up the road before turning to the left. And because she was not carrying a flashlight, the van's occupants, they're unable to determine her location after she turned northward in the direction of her house. They reason that she perhaps had turned off the road to walk around a snowdrift. Yeah, there she goes. And she'd also reached the rear kitchen part of the house where an inside light would not be visible. And they waited like 20 minutes, but still not completely satisfied that Mrs. Hanscom was secure. Graham decided to drive to their home in East Machias and call her. That makes sense, rather than walk after her. At about 12:10 a.m., the Grahams tried to reach her by phone. There's no answer. Called a relative, George Gaddis, and he owns a four-wheel drive pickup truck. He drove up the Hanscom Road. He noticed where someone had walked within 100 yards of the house and then veered northward across an open field and past the face of the house. So continuing on, Graham goes in the driveway, sees some undisturbed snow. This is like a murder mystery. And he said he knew then that his aunt was in trouble, and he hoped that he'd be able to follow her tracks quickly without a flashlight, because in the rush of her home, he'd forgotten to bring one. Walking in snow up to his knees, he followed her tracks more than 100 yards across the field before they disappeared. He calls out her names in the howling and blackness. Then faintly he heard her answer. I told her to keep hollering so I'd know where she was and could come to her. When he reached her about 100 yards further toward a wooded area towards the back of the house, she's lying on her back in the snow. She'd lost most of the use of her legs, and her hands without gloves were numb. Thank God, she told Gaddis. And she was awful glad to see me, he said. He pulled her through the snow to his truck. He took her to his home. If Ed hadn't called me, I'd never have known. And Mrs. Margaret Gardner said Sunday that her aunt was still experiencing considerable pain, but is expected to regain her circulation and use of her hands and legs during the next few days of continued therapy. Somehow we made a story out of that, I think. Here's a story. Let's roll it back further. Let's go way back to 1886, I think this one is. Out of Greenville, Maine, E.S. Austin, who was shot near Lily Bay up in Greenville. He was shot Friday night, and there were 5 in the party, and they came from the towns of Cambridge and Parkman. So Thursday they killed 2 deer. Friday morning they left their camp at Sandy Bay. They followed the Lily Bay Road toward Beaver Creek. After arriving at Beaver Creek, they began to go into the woods down to the south of the road. And Austin was the last man to leave the road, and E.C. Willard, who fired the unlucky shot, was the next man to him. Soon after leaving the road, Willard started a deer, and after following him for quite a distance, he saw him about 25 feet away. The deer sprang at the same time that he came in sight, and he blazed away with a .45-90 Winchester. Not sure what that one is. He missed the deer, but a cry of anguish from behind a pile of spruce tops warned him that somebody was in trouble, just basically blasting away. Running around the tops, he found Austin, covered with blood and unconscious. Rubbing snow in his face, he quickly brought him to, and then a hasty examination showed the ball had gone through the leg near the body. Calling other members of his party, he set to work to put a ligature on the injured limb and got a fire started by the time the others got to him. Their team was at the camp at Sandy Bay, about 8 miles from the scene of the accident, and one man started with all the speed for the team, and the rest did what they could for the sufferer. Keep in mind, this is, if you look at the map today, this is still remote. This is way up by the Canadian border. Austin says the hardest part of the whole affair was the ride from Mud Pond to Sandy Bay, about 8 miles, over that abominable tote road, Old Woods Road. After stopping at their camp to eat a lunch, because, when you shoot somebody, you got to stop and have lunch, and rest the wounded man, they came down the ice and reached the village about dark. They got a hold of the doctor, Dr. Hunt. He dressed the wound and found no bones broken, although the ball had passed very nearly through the middle of the leg. The writer was shown, the author of this article here, was shown a heavy jackknife which was in the man's pants, and it was struck by the ball as it came out of his leg. It was a heavy one-bladed knife, but all that was left of it was the back spring and about half of the brass sides, the rest having gone along with the ball. Willard, who fired the shot, told the writer that it was his first and last deer hunt. It ought to be. Austin, lying in bed near, overheard the remark, and he promised him either another hunt or a sound thrashing next fall if both lived until that time. And a further comment here, Moosehead Lake is a solid sheet of ice. The rain Monday covered it with water, and the stages had a hard time Tuesday as it did not freeze it hard enough to hold the horses. Sam Page, who drives one of C.M. Wood's stages, came in Tuesday with one of his horses cut on every foot by the top ice. He reported 4 inches of water in many places on top of the ice. That was quite a story. 1893, on this day, we have had no snow of any account for the past 3 weeks, and in many places it is sadly needed. It wasn't snowing there. State news, Melvin Perrott, that's a great Maine name, of Deer Isle was seriously injured by a premature explosion in his stone quarry recently. He was taken to the Maine General Hospital. Here's something you don't see going on today. There was a knitting bee at Hogan's Hall last week for the benefit of Mrs. Hannah Ward, who is sick and can neither knit nor sew. Over 30 ladies met at the hall, and by the work they did must have worked industriously. 50 or more partook of a picnic supper, and in the evening the Grange held an open meeting and carried out a program of vocal and instrumental music, reading, declamations, remarks, etc. I bet the remarks were good. The case of the United States against George W. Williams, better known as Keg, on the charge of being a retail liquor seller without payment of the United States tax, came up at a U.S. Commissioner in Augusta on Wednesday, and it resulted in acquittal, the testimony being wholly in the defendant's favor. Prohibition. Well, not really, but they said they need that tax money. Tuesday night at midnight, Tug S.B. Jones broke the ice at Machias and was towed to Machias Port. And out of Unity, a building at Unity used by Alfred Clark as a storehouse was burned at 3 o'clock Wednesday morning. The upper part of the building was occupied by a family by the name of Pushaw, who were getting their furniture ready to move. All of their effects were burned. The building was partly insured. There were a lot of fires then. Out of Brunswick, Mr. Hiram Alexander, an aged citizen of Brunswick, he occupies a house still in good repair, which was erected by his father over 100 years ago. He tells the Telegraph that there have been 26 births and only 3 deaths in the old house. Isn't that something? That's an old place. What else do we have? Another story here. Sunday afternoon, this is out of Skowhegan. Sunday afternoon, Mr. Josh Williams and Dr. C.H. Wilbur, 2 of Skowhegan's best skaters, skated up the river to Old Point. It's a distance of about 9 miles. Before they got started for home, it had snowed enough to make the water up over the ice, which made it impossible to skate, so they started for home overland, thinking they'd be able to hire someone to bring them home, but their attempt to hire a team was fruitless, and they had the pleasure of walking all the way. These are some tough guys. That doesn't say if did they have like their boots on their back or how they did that, but that would be very, very difficult. March, even today. Here's kind of we just threw this story on at the end because we caught our eye here. For the past, it's out of Utica, New York, from 1886. I can't tell if it's a joke or not. For the past few weeks, 2 large eagles have been noticed by farmers living 5 miles north of Little Falls, and last Friday, one of them created a great excitement by endeavoring to carry off a 5-year-old son of Joseph Davis, who lives near the old Stroud Tavern 2 miles from there. It's on the old Ritter Road in the town of Mannheim. Mr. Davis and a hired hand were engaged in building and repairing fences when they were suddenly alarmed by a frantic appeal for help by the little boy. He'd wandered a short distance away from where they were at work, and the men looked in the direction from where the voice came, and they were startled in discovering that a mammoth eagle measuring about 7 feet from tip to tip was viciously tugging at the boy's garments in order to get a good hold so that the child could be carried into the forest and made its prey. The men came to the rescue of the boy and fought the eagle off with clubs. They were so excited that no effort was made to capture the bird. Definitely the kind of story you'd like to pass down to the grandkids. We didn't have a mammal at the moment, but we were looking at a tree. It's kind of intrigued us, and we thought of an honorary tree here. This is the rubber tree, the Ficus elastica, the rubber tree. It doesn't grow in Maine. You can grow it inside. Height of about 7 feet with a spread of 5 feet if you're growing it indoors. The rubber plant or the rubber fig. It's an ornamental accent plant producing large, oval, glossy green leaves in a frost-free area. The variety can grow quite large, about 60 feet. It's a popular house plant in colder climates. The rubber tree's glossy oval leaves remain dark green in color throughout the year on the plant. It has a round habit of growth. It's a multi-stemmed evergreen house plant with more or less rounded form. It may benefit from occasional pruning to look its best. When you grow it inside, it grows about 7 feet tall at maturity with a spread of 5 feet. It grows at a medium rate and under ideal conditions can be expected to live for approximately 50 years. So I think it's time I got like a parrot and a rubber tree. These house plants perform well in both bright or indirect sunlight and strong artificial light and can therefore be situated in almost any well-lit room or location. It prefers dry to average moisture levels with very well-drained soil and may die if left in standing water for any length of time. And then they talk about the care of your rubber tree. And we're looking into that a little bit further. And Firestone Rubber, they own in Liberia, they own a rubber tree plantation. It's a massive rubber tree plantation. The rubber trees are drained of their sap, which is a milky white liquid. It slowly drips down, just like maple syrup. It's actually pure latex, and they collect it much like a birch tree or maple syrup with a bucket on the tree. The process is known as rubber tapping, and the white stuff's collected in small buckets and then aggregated into bigger containers with additives so it doesn't harden. The trees are replanted after about 30 years of use. I guess Firestone's also built schools and roads, and churches and houses for people working on the plantation. They don't actually build the tires there in Liberia, just the latex, and they ship it offshore where those rubber products are made. But they have some pictures here, and it just looks like white latex. It looks just like you'd imagine. I think that's our podcast for today, but let's take a quick look at the weather forecast. For today, snow. Areas of blowing snow after 11 a.m. and a high near 21. We have a northeast wind about 15 miles per hour, gusting 25. In other words, making some big drifts. Looking at 3 to 7 inches possible. For Monday, mostly sunny with a high near 30. And Tuesday, cloudy with a high 32. But then on Wednesday, we get a rainstorm with a high near 49. So up and down the weather goes here in Maine. That is actually the podcast for today. Until next time, this is Downeast Mike wishing you and your loved ones a day that is full of grace, love, and kindness. We'll see you. I'm just a stone standing free. And I can see all the people looking at me.
just a stone. All the water and the days rushing by, well, I feel lonely, but I can never cry, 'cause I'm just a stone. I'm just a stone. I know colors, but they're all shades of gray. And I know emotions, but I can never say, 'cause I'm just a stone. I'm just a stone. I'm just a stone, standing free. And I can see all the people looking at me. Yeah, I'm just a stone.